Hi everyone, my name is Elliot. I'm the co-founder of Mnemonic AI that creates psychographic buyer personas and customer insights with artificial intelligence. Today, I want to tell you a little more about the importance of updating your personas frequently. We see clients that have personas in place that are 3, 4, 5 years old. In a world like this, with changing demands constantly, it is important to keep on track. So let's get started. When entering the market, the first thing an entrepreneur should do is create well-founded personas in order to really understand who they are dealing with right from the start. From product development, marketing, and service, the understanding generated by personas is essential to ensure a company's success in the long run. And who doesn't know the stories of companies that have done everything right initially, and the bigger they grow, they further deviate from this ideology. There are many reasons for this, such as forming silos within the departments that are not communicating with each other anymore, or the company is only focused on running the daily business. And by doing this process, they often lose track of the actual goal, serving and satisfying the customer. But the market learned a lot over the past years. UX designers popping out right and left like tulips in the spring. And suddenly, customer-centricity becomes the biggest buzzword in many organizations. As a result, companies increasingly focus on developing a dynamic understanding of their customers and recognizing and responding quickly to constantly changing demands, wishes, arising from a various range of factors. And I'm going to go a little deeper, like which factors will ultimately require an update of your personas. Remember, personas are only effective if they are data-driven, accurate, and free from any human bias. Updating them should be an integral part of your business strategy to ensure that you create the right product and your marketing and sales endeavors reach those that need it most. If you can help your potential customers evaluate your product or service on their terms, you will win them over and hold them as loyal customers in the long run. So now let us look at those factors in more detail. Let's start with probably the most recent one, COVID. Let's be frank, the pandemic impacted everyone. It was the change of daily lives caused by home office or lockdowns, the fear for health, financial restrictions, logistical delays, just to name a few. Those who understand their client base based on years of industry experience now face a huge unknown because nobody has ever dealt with a pandemic before, and it had an ultimate impact on your customers, and you should be on top of that. The next one are communication channels. Decades ago, there were a few newspapers. Today, there are thousands and thousands of news websites, some which use Twitter as a good source of information and thus spread misinformation and untruth. In addition, there are new channels such as TikTok, Twitch, Clubhouse are emerging more and more. The use of established channels is changing, and it can be seen, for example, let's take LinkedIn as an example, which has really become the most important sales channel in the B2B space. All these developments influence the needs of customers and their communication methods. Dynamic personas, those that are not static but adapt to the market, are fundamental for picking up and understanding these changes and choosing the right channels going forward. The next factor would be emergent acquisition. Imagine when companies merge, they challenge combining two different strategies, two different ideas, and turning them into a joint venture, into a common path. Expanding business services opens doors to buyers that may not have been relevant to one or the other company prior at all. So if a merger is imminent, it is prudent to revisit the types of customers each company originally had and determine the characteristics and personas that are still relevant, but also those that will no longer work in this merger. In addition, companies should agree on how the personas will be created, how they will be used, and how they will be updated. So representatives from both companies must work together on this. Differences in data sources, data collection, data formats, expectations, and the handling are just a few points that the companies need to work through. Another classic example that requires persona updates is when the corporate strategy changes. When a company direction changes or plans a rebranding, it is crucial to reevaluate whether your current personas are still suitable to this new path. For instance, if you decide that the new path is most focuses on an older, more mature customer base and adjusts the wording and the branding accordingly, you need to ensure that the personas are adapted accordingly as well. Before rebranding or shifting business strategies, the first thing you should do is create personas that reflect the new path. Thereby, every stakeholder involved understands right from the beginning where this shift leads to and for whom it is at the end done. Meanwhile, when monitoring existing personas frequently, they might be the trigger themselves for rebranding or a change in customer strategy. For instance, when you realize that your personas change from a very young to an older audience, this might indicate that it's time to adjust your branding, your wording, and strategy towards that older segment. Another factor that drives persona updates is when organizations decide to change the product range or service range. Let's assume your company decides to launch a new product. You must identify the right audience, right? So ultimately, when you expand your offerings, your buyer personas will change or will increase. Perhaps your products were previously just aimed at men and suddenly you include women's offerings. That is a pretty extreme shift in the target audience, but already the implementation of a higher priced product might require an adjustment of your personas. Therefore, it is essential to create personas for that segment. The new target group probably has completely different needs, pain points, goals, or problems than your original target audience. Once the new buyer personas are created, it is critical to compare them to the existing ones. This will clarify which adjustments need to be made in marketing and sales. And the bigger the difference between those new target audiences and your old ones is, the more work it is for the respective teams. This effort will define the ability for true customer centricity within the organization. Controversially, the personas also need to be updated if a company decides to reduce the product line. This means that probably specific personas are no longer of relevance for your organizations. And also means that, for instance, teams with limited budgets now have the opportunity to have access to new funds and address their customer needs in a whole new targeted and more cost-effective way. Another factor that will force you to update the personas or create new ones is the geographical expansion. Let us assume that a company decides to expand the product range geographically. It must also reconsider the existing personas. It is a fallacy to assume that personas that were created for one geographical region can be easily adapted to a new one. The cultural differences alone will require to update, change, or create whole new personas. Another factor is clearly the competitive landscape. A wide variety of factors influence your customers. This is clear. But competition is probably one of the biggest ones. They can have an enormous influence on the needs and wishes of your customer base. And this influence might not necessarily even come from your own industry, but a whole different one. Simple example, cameras and cell phones were two completely different industries for a long time until the iPhone came out. Therefore, many manufacturers of cameras had to develop whole new marketing strategies to remain successful. And these manufacturers have lost, certainly, specific customer segments to the cell phone industry, since they now just basically serve a need as a byproduct. Accordingly, these personas will fall away in the future, or the camera manufacturer will manage to concentrate on the desires that a cell phone manufacturer cannot yet serve. Last but not least, a very important factor that you should always keep in mind when you have your personas in place. And this is new data sources. We have clients that we created profound personas for. They're great, they're useful. And along the way, they decide to create new interviews, they create new surveys, they figure out other potential very important data sources that are of value. And you're now able to use that information to enrich the personas. The problem is many organizations create personas once and then let them sit there. And this is exactly what you should not do. Continuously look for new data sources that might be of value for that process. To sum up, now, after we looked at various factors, which I'm sure there are many more, so feel free to share them if you have any other thoughts or ideas, what forced you maybe to update your personas. But I think it is very clear that it makes total sense to keep your personas updated, to have dynamic personas that can be enriched continuously with new data sources that adapt to changing market conditions internally and externally. And I would say that dynamic personas are the future to stay ahead of your competitors. So as always, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to dump them down in the comments or send us an email. And I'm looking forward to see you soon. Thank you.